Okay, thanks very much for joining us. We've got a poll slide coming up, and I'll launch that poll now. And if you can vote for the best option for you while we're going, I'll just leave that up for now. So hello everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of Recovering Troubled Projects, a free short course facilitated by IT Masters and Charles Sturt University, or CSU. My name is Guy, and I'll be your MC during this course, which is coordinated and presented by Brenton Burchmore, who I'll introduce shortly. All webinars for this course will be held on Tuesdays at midday Australian Eastern Standard Time, and ideally, reminder emails are sent 24 hours and 1 hour before the event. Sorry about the mess up this week. Before we begin, a few words on Zoom's webinar functions. We encourage the asking of questions and the use of chat during the webinar, and there are two ways to do so that we use. We ask that you direct all course content related questions to the Q&A section, and that you send all administration type questions or just general chat to the chat box. You can chat with panelists only or to all of your fellow students as well. Just by toggling through the drop-down box, once you have opened the chat log, you'll see a to option, and it'll be either panelists or panelists and attendees. I like to keep everyone in the loop, as there are usually some very experienced and industry-based students who will be most helpful. Sometimes the chat logs are quite informative. We'll have a Q&A session periodically throughout the webinar as well, so lodge your questions there, and if we don't get to them, we can still see it, so don't worry, we'll get there later. Chantel from IT Masters is here today in a chat and technical support role. She's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, commonly called the Moodle, which is where you'll find all the other materials needed for this course. Brenton is fantastic and has pre-recorded lectures which are available there. We've got discussion forums where we'll have a couple of prompts and where you can talk shop, and there's weekly quizzes as well. If you have any questions today or later on, please feel free to contact us using the details on that page. You might be wondering, if it's your first time to an IT Masters short course, who IT Masters are and who CSU is who CSU is perhaps, and why we're running these courses free. IT Masters is a training organisation that exists almost exclusively as a partner to CSU. We work with CSU to create and deliver a number of their Masters courses, and we also market those courses on their behalf. And we think that the best way to do that is to give some of it away free of charge. And if we do a good enough job, I hope that some students will enroll in the full Masters program. That said, I hope these 4 lecture short courses stand alone and are worth something in their own right. We want you to learn some useful information, have some fun, and hopefully make connections with your fellow students. If you pass the assessment at the end of the course, you'll earn a certificate of achievement. We don't expect you all to come in and sign up for the master's degree at the end of the course. If you just come away thinking that CSU is a university that's doing some good things and appreciated the free content, then for us it's a win-win. It's probably enough out of me for now. I'll introduce Brenton now. Actually, no. First I'll go through some upcoming short courses. Thank you, Brenton. He's controlling the slide deck.
We could probably end the poll now too, couldn't we?
Yep, I'll just go through it because people listening to the recording can't see the poll. The question is, which best describes your role or relationship with projects? Answer 1 is executive or business leader. I use projects to achieve business goals, and that's about 10%. I'll end the poll and share it now for those that are listening live. So yeah, 10% executive or business leaders is their relationship with projects. Project management or leadership, I have some responsibility for project outcomes, and that's over 50% of attendees at the moment. Delivery team member, I'm directly involved in the delivery of project outcomes, 20%. Project resource, I'm only occasionally involved in project work, roughly 10%. And user, I work with the project outcomes once they are delivered, 2% only. So any comments on that, Brenton? It'll clearly help us tailor future
it'll help
weeks.
me.
But
yeah, over the next few weeks, it gives me a lot of input as to what the audience is going to be looking for and what kind of or what level of content they're going to want to see. So that's the main reason for this poll. I noticed a few people can't see it. We got about 75% of the audience has managed to see it and submit an answer. So for those of you who can't, I presume it's just something to do with the browser or the way in which the poll is interacting with the browser. So it's probably something like that.
Yep. And for those that are listening live, you won't be able to see it at all, is my belief. But hopefully you've got enough out of it. Yeah, upcoming short courses. We've got Networking Fundamentals coming up, which is a nice sort of gateway course into cybersecurity and networking master's programs. And we've also got an AWS services short course, which was meant to be earlier, but we've just had a couple of delays. So we'll get to that one soon and keep everyone posted. Also have more short courses coming this year. We'll have a bit more of a chat about CSU next week. We were going to have a representative of CSU talk about all of their very many options, but I think I might do that next week. So that's okay. Thank you, Brenton. And speaking of Brenton, I suppose an introduction is in order. Long-time short course developer and deliverer, and also long-time IT Masters project management and management course or subject developer and deliverer. Also very nice to work with, and very exciting this short course in particular, because we're going to be trialing a scenario-based learning platform, which he'll talk more about later. 20 years in the corporate environment, tech industries, all sides of projects, all sorts of participation, whether it's been the development side or the management side. As you can see, recently completed his MBA. And a passionate champion of game-based learning. So I look forward to hearing more about that one. He's long been our most popular short course mentor as well. So I'm sure it's going to be a lovely course. I hope you're all looking forward to it, and I hope you're all looking forward to Brenton.
Before you kick off, Brenton, if we can move that Zoom box up the top away from your screen, just because it's providing a little black box for all the students. If you have a second screen, yeah, the control panel, if you can move it somewhere off your screen.
Or just minimize it and I'll have the questions for you.
Is that better?
Much, thank you.
Thanks, Chantel.
Hey, hello, folks. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. We've got people tuned in from everywhere. Thank you for that tip, Chantel. I didn't know I could drag that box around. That's good to know. Guy, thanks for the intro. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm broadcasting from sunny Singapore. I've seen people logging in, talking about people from all over the place. Sunny Singapore, right on the equator, where we have two seasons here. We have the hot and wet season and the wet and hot season. So it doesn't really matter what time of year it is here. It's all pretty much the same. Obviously, we've got people from different hemispheres and different parts of different countries. So welcome, everyone. If you are listening to this via the recording, obviously, hello to you as well. We know that a lot of people aren't able to log in live, so the recording will be posted up there fairly soon, within a few hours, usually after the event. But over the next 4 weeks, I'm hopefully going to try and give you a condensed version of what is ultimately a full university subject. So the subject of project management recovery is the full university subject, and we're going to be plucking some of the more interesting bits out of that and talking through that. And one of the things that Guy mentioned that we will be doing is we're launching, or we're introducing a new idea, which is Produco scenario-based learning. Now, this is something that it's a proof of concept for us, because we're trying to see how well this should work and what it should look like. So your input, your feedback, and your guidance is going to be very valuable to help us shape this in taking online learning to the next level. So this is all about interactive learning. This is literally a simulator, and it's a scenario simulator where you log in, you will be presented with challenges, problems, questions in the form of chat interactions with actors, which are not really people, but these are a fictional project team that are presenting you with challenges, and your job is to try and get a little bit of information and then make a decision. And you've got scores, which are going to track your progress with managing your budget, managing your project output and progress, and managing quality. Now, this particular scenario is not one that you're meant to win. This is project recovery. So this isn't about getting all of your scores looking good. If you get one of your scores looking good, that's an achievement. because it's meant to be bad news. You also have two other things in that scenario. You have actions that you can take at different points as proactive things, steps that you can take. And we've also included about 50 micro lectures. So these micro lectures are all under 1 minute in length. And as you go through certain incidents that occur in the project, little pop-ups will say, hey, do you want to listen to this? We've called them PIPs. You want to listen to this, or you can listen to them at any point later if you want to. So this is all part of the different mechanisms that we're trialing. Some of you have already confirmed your registration with Podoko. Those of you who haven't, you should all have an email from us, which lets you activate the Podoko element as well. Now, Podoko will only be available, I think, around about Friday this week. So we're still tightening a few nuts and bolts and getting it ready. It is fairly simple. It's not the full featured version yet. We're not really at the beta release stage. This is only just a proof of concept. So there'll be a few things in it that may not work as well as they will later, but we'll certainly value your input. There's also the portal that you'll be able to, the portal you use to access the game from. That's where you'll be able to drill down on all of the exciting details about exactly what your scores are doing, the decisions you made, and you'll be able to look at all of that info. So we'll talk a bit more about that next week once it's live and people are into it, and we'll give you a bit more guidance on how to do it. So we're going to talk about troubled projects. We're going to talk about what happens when projects do go horribly wrong. We're going to talk about, today we're going to talk about defining what is project recovery. We're going to talk about what it means, what it involves, how to know what to look for in how to understand when a project should be considered troubled or red and should be acted upon somewhat differently. And we're going to introduce the ideas of how different that really is. Next week, we're going to talk about details about the different ways in which projects can fail and how that leads into project recovery. So what do we mean by a troubled project? Now, some of the terms that we're going to be using are a little bit interchangeable. Troubled project is a little bit generic. It's any project that might need help. But a project that we call red is a project that definitely has reached a point where it needs intervention. Now, first of all, let's talk about how do we identify that? What do we mean by a red project? Well, we've all seen projects that aren't healthy. We've all seen projects that some of us, different people, would consider troubled at different points. Now, what I call a green project is a project where it's not perfect because, let's face it, no project is. And so where things are simply a little bit outside of the variables and the outside of tolerances, that's still okay. That's normal project management for most people. But then you reach a stage where the project variables might be significantly outside of the tolerances. They might be a long way outside of what should be. Or they may have been outside for a longer period of time. It might only be a little bit outside of some of the tolerances, but for a long period of time in the project. So there we start to say, okay, this project is not it's not perfect, but it's a little bit abnormal in how imperfect it is. Then we might reach a stage where the business case for this project has become threatened by the project being outside of its tolerances. So this is where we start to see there's a possible impact on the value of the money that's been invested and the benefits that are expected from this project. When that starts to be affected, we're now into a stage where we're at level 3. So this is, it's not quite red, but it's getting close. At step 4, when our project is in that stage where it's being threatened by the various tolerances and the various parameters, and we're worried about the business case, then project management, the traditional or whatever project management that's involved, that's trying to fix things. And it comes a point where there's a recognition that what we've been doing so far isn't working well enough. So here you might say, well, it's still just project management. And the way we've been managing the project so far hasn't worked, but maybe we need to do things a bit different, but we're still not ready for a real recovery mode. That is the next step. And this is the important differentiator. When you reach a stage with your project that you have a lack of confidence in using the existing project management methods or system or structure or framework, is not expected to make tangible changes of improvement. So you look at these 5 steps, right? Top one is just normal. Second one, it's a bit unhealthy and we know it. Third one is it's unhealthy enough to threaten its value. Fourth one is what we're doing to fix that problem isn't enough. And the fifth one is, well, we're not sure that anything that we're going to be able to do with this is going to work. Then you have a red project. Now, after this point, you then usually get a couple of things. Firstly, there's this risk that a project might get cancelled. We're saying, well, we don't think we can fix this, so should we cancel it? Is it at risk of wasting all of our money? But perhaps the end result that we've aimed for, the reason for the project's existence in the first place, may still be desired. It may still be valuable, something that we want. So these top 5 are the stages in which we look at to say, once we get to 5, the project has gone red. And that's the label that is often used by saying, well, we're going to consider this project in a very different way. And this is what I want to talk about today. So identify and clarify exactly what we mean by project recovery. So project recovery isn't just, well, let's just try a bit harder. It's something far more drastic than that. So this top 4 is where you have regular project management activity. And by the time you've gotten to point 5, you have a strong candidate for project recovery and all of the differences and all of the drama that's associated with that, which we're about to explore in a little more detail. This is when you get into a recovery mode. And when you get into recovery mode, nothing is sacred anymore. Everything's up for grabs. So let's talk for a moment, though, about what happens if a project gets cancelled. Is that recovery? I mean, do we need to think of it in terms of a recovering project if the project actually gets cancelled? Well, no. If a project gets cancelled, usually the principles of project management that is governing it can handle the process of cancelling a project. Usually when you cancel a project, there's things to recover, or there's a possibility, there's an attempt at salvage. This is because, depending on how far the project has gone, there may be still value available in it. It could be value in some outputs that were created, or it could be some value in some investment that was made, some infrastructure, some assets that were created, some knowledge that was obtained. All these things can mean that we might have something here to salvage. So this doesn't normally need project recovery. It's a very different process. Now this might still be quite different from what we were doing with our project management, because obviously we have a totally different goal now. But the same people and the same systems are usually the right ones to switch into a salvage mode. Doesn't mean they'll be happy about it, but it doesn't mean we need to go to the level of upheaval that recovery normally involves. But when you get to this point, that sort of step 5 on the ladder that we just looked at, that's where we reach a decision that has to be made. Do we continue and try and struggle with the project and claw it back, or do we enter a recovery mode, or do we cancel the project and enter a salvage mode? And that's a pretty big decision. So let's break that decision down in a bit more detail, because that's the point that you get the big scary issues come into play. Do you continue the project? And in my experience, this is probably the most common decision that gets made when it shouldn't. So the continuation is saying, well, actually, no, it's not quite that bad. You know, we're not totally red yet. You know, it's just a dark shade of pink. And we don't yet need all of the things that are going to happen with recovery. So we're going to keep with what we're doing. Try a little bit longer, try a little bit harder. Or we go into recovery mode and say, well, actually, no, we're going to officially enter an entirely different mode of operation for our project with everything that that entails. And a lot of what's been in place already will give way to some new version of it. Or we make the decision to cancel and salvage. Now, if it's very early in the project, there may not be anything really to salvage. But that decision will be part of that process to say, well, if we're going to cancel, what is there to salvage? What should we try and salvage? It means that the difference is we are abandoning the goal. So if we get to the cancel and salvage stage, we've abandoned the objectives and the goal of the project. If we're in recovery mode, we are abandoning the project management, but we are not abandoning the goal. We're saying that the activities in recovery, the activities that have led to this point need to be fundamentally revisited, but the goal is still worth striving for, even if that gets re-envisaged as well. So this is the really big decision that we face at this point. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times already that recovery is a big thing, it's a dramatic thing. And I want to make the point as to exactly why that's the case. Because sometimes people talk about recovery and they'll perhaps mention it as a bit of a throwaway line. Well, we need to get into recovery mode, we need to sort of do some drastic things here. But true project recovery is really quite significant. It's as significant as most of the steps that were taken to begin the project in the first place. Usually it means these things. It means that the leadership of the project will likely change. It usually means the project manager will change. It usually means the project sponsor will be replaced by a recovery champion. Not totally replaced, because they may still be there to sponsor the goal. But their role and a lot of the activities in creating fervor will be replaced by someone else who's going to champion a different aspect of this project. You may find that other leadership, management, or senior roles within the project will get changed. It doesn't mean that everybody's out the door and a whole new bunch of people come in. It might mean that a lot of people are still involved, but in a different capacity, in a different way, doing different things. But it means that there is an open acceptance at major structural change in the leadership of the project. It means that we're also accepting that we're probably going to have to make some immediate and some painful choices. And often projects get into a red state because these painful choices haven't been made. They've been delayed, they've been pushed back, they've been avoided. And what the recovery phase is doing is saying, no, we need to bite the bullet. We need to swallow the painful pill and do whatever it's going to take, and that is going to be painful. And this is part of the process of switching into recovery mode, that's saying, well, we're going to acknowledge this. Because when the pain comes, if we haven't acknowledged that this is part of a project recovery scenario, that these painful decisions are going to get avoided again. They're going to get overlooked. They're not going to get made effectively, if at all. It also means re-examining the business case. Now, I mentioned before that usually recovery is going to happen when we still want an outcome. When we still might want the outcome that we originally envisaged, or maybe not. In recovery, we will challenge that question, that decision. So we're not automatically saying, right, well, we still want this same pink elephant and that's what we're going to build and that's the end of it. We just need to figure out a better way to do it. Not so in a project recovery. Project recovery, nothing is sacred, even the goal. It could well be, as part of the recovery processes, that we learn that one of the biggest contributors to our project's failure is the fact that there's a problem with the goal. There's a problem with the objective. So it's not sacred or protected. The business case in its entirety can be re-examined and redefined. And this is going to mean that people are going to get upset. The egos are going to be bruised. People are going to be disappointed. People are going to be worried. And we need to be ready for that as an organization. So when we go into recovery mode, by acknowledging how serious it is and by acknowledging how much upheaval it entails, we have a chance to say, right, let's take the steps necessary to deal with the fallout from that level of intensity. Let's be aware that people are going to be upset, worried, disappointed, scared, and let's make sure we deal with that aspect of it. Let's deal with the morale. This is not purely a functional issue. This is not purely about, well, let's do some different reporting and find the problem. This is a whole different level of intensity. And because of that, because of the magnitude of this, it's usually the project board or whoever constitutes the major decision makers controlling the mandate for the project are usually the people who will make the decision to enter recovery mode. And sometimes recovery mode is a last-ditch effort to say, well, we really don't want to just cancel this and walk away from it. Let's put it into recovery mode and see if we can salvage a better outcome out of this. But it's the people who are ultimately responsible for the conversion of investment into benefits. The people who agreed to put up the funding in the first place and say, let's do this. those are usually the ones who make the decision to say, okay, let's do this totally different. Now, I'm just going to put up a quick poll. What percentage of the projects are considered a failure in your organization? It's a loose statistic here. So I apologize for those of you who can't read these polls. I'm not sure exactly why, but for those of you who can, jump in and I'll read out the question. So basically it's very few is less than 20%. Some, but not all, means sort of 20 to 50%. Most would be 50%, but not quite 80, and nearly all would be 80%. So we're going to pause for a minute and just let everyone put an answer in there. I need to pause and put polls up so I can have a sip of my cup of tea. Guy, are there any burning questions that have come in that we need to answer?
No, Chantel's answered the majority of it. I'll just have another quick look.
There's one question I can see.
Yeah,
Would you be addressing financial implications? But yeah, we will, but not this week. Okay, so in week 3, we will be talking about the actions to take. So although some of what we'll talk about next week, we're going to talk about the reasons for failure and how they impact project recovery. So there might be some clues out of next week, but I think week 3 is probably going to be the week that's really going to answer that question of the financial implications of taking a project into recovery mode, because that's where we're going to talk about the recovery strategy and what that entails.
Okay. We've got 75% of respondents now, and it looks like the majority have very few, less than 20%, 64%. Some, but not most, is at 31%, and then most, but not all, more than 50%, 6. And thankfully, no one has responded nearly all.
Wow, that's awesome. You know this is an anonymous post, right? You can be honest here. You can tell me it's all bad. That's better than I expected. Certainly, it's better than many of the global statistics that we see, which point to somewhere around 2/3 of projects.
Wow.
It depends on the definition of failure, though. And that's what I want to talk a bit about in a moment, and how we define failure. So you're all saying, well, yeah, it happens, but it's generally not terrible. It's not all the time. Well, there's a good chance that there'll be people in the organization that'll have a slightly different view to what you do. So let me close that. We've shared that, have we? We have. All right.
So yep. So that's shared, and then we'll close that now.
All right. Let's talk about why it's not easy to decide in that early slide where we talked about, all right, you get to level 5, you're in recovery mode. That's it, right? It's just you join the dots. No, it's not that simple. And this is one of the reasons why it can be really challenging to actually make the decision of whether or not a project is a failure, is successful or not. And quite often, a lot of the reasons are not visible to many of the stakeholders. Now, let's look at it from the business point of view, first of all. So the business are, that's sort of the executive level. These are the people who are generally responsible for ensuring that projects achieve outcomes that meet the strategic goals of the business. So they want to see value for the money that gets invested in project work. So they're responsible for the benefits, fulfilling a strategy overall. That's one perspective. Now, if the project itself has all sorts of challenges and woes, if it's absolute misery for the people in it, but it's still going to help the strategy, the business may say, look, no, just carry on. It's going well. We like it. The project team, the project people, that are those who are directly or indirectly involved and responsible for delivering the project, that's an entirely different perspective. They are the ones that live every day in that environment. They're at the coalface. And so they're responsible for the delivery of the project outcomes. And usually they have a vested interest in a project continuing because they identify with it. It's their role, it's their function, it's something that they are able to draw purpose and value for themselves. And so a lot of the time we'll see people who are involved in project delivery who want to see a project fixed, not cancelled. And this could have a very different competing view to the way in which the business perceives the project and its success or failure. If the project is a horrible place to work, if the project is difficult because of personal dynamics or the way in which things happen, it may be viewed as a terrible failing project by people in it. Then you have the user's perspective. So the users, I mean, these are the people who have to take what gets built and then do something useful with it. So their role is to convert the outcome of the project and convert that into value. So they leverage that, whatever gets produced, to turn it into the benefits that the business is hoping for, the reason for the project in the first place. Now, if they get something that makes their life harder, if they're looking like they're going to get something that makes things worse, if they're really not looking forward to it, they may view the project as a failure. The project team may think it's great. You know, they're enjoying their job. The business is thinking this is going to be good when we get there. And the users are saying, no way. And then you've got the suppliers. And suppliers aren't usually the first ones you think of as having a perspective on project success or failure. But it's not negligible, because they're the ones that are responsible for contributing and delivering for the pieces of the puzzle. You know, they bring the bricks and lay the bricks that make the wall. So what they want is profitability for their work. They want to get paid for what they do. Now, how does this matter in the perception of success or failure? Well, you may have a situation where everyone else thinks the project's great, but it's totally unprofitable for suppliers or sections of the organization that are supplying to this. And they may be grating under that failure from their point of view. And that may mean that ultimately they will do something, they will take steps, they will take action to end the project because it's not profitable for them. Well, of course they would want to. There's a reason for them to do that. If it's not profitable, then they're going to want to do something to solve that problem. And that something may be, well, let's kill the project, let's torpedo the project, let's undermine the project. So they may be seeing the project as a failure from their point of view, even though everyone's happy. So here's summarizing that in a different way. The business says project is failing because they don't see they're going to get the result. The supplier says it's failing because we're not being paid profitably for what we're delivering. The users might say, well, it's failing because, you know, we can't work with these results. Or maybe the business says it's successful and everyone else thinks it's a failure. Or maybe the suppliers say it's great because, you know, we're getting paid good money for this, you know, maybe too much money, but don't say that, right? Because this is really on a good wicket here. But maybe the business is saying, well, hang on, we're not getting value for money out of this. So the problem we face when we get into a recovery decision is that we need to collate all of these perspectives. We need to explore all of these perspectives. We need to understand all of the different ways in which project success and failure can be measured. Now, this is more often the case when you have noise about failure. You have a particular group or a number of people that are saying, it's failing, we're waving the red flag, it's no good. Now, that needs to be fact-checked against what all of the other perspectives might be. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean that they're not something we should respond to. That we may need to respond to that. And that may well be a reason to enter recovery mode. But that means we've got to explore it in the context of everything else. So remember the definition we gave earlier about how to know whether or not a project should be considered a candidate for recovery. It's whether we think it's outside of tolerances, bad enough and for long enough that it's threatening the business case, and we don't think we can fix it with the current methods. So it's unlikely that if only one group is saying we've got a problem, it's unlikely that we're going to be considered red. But it means that we might become red. If we don't recognize and address the fact that for one group, they're considering it a potential failure, then if that's not addressed through the normal project management system, then we may end up with a failed project later that needs a bigger hammer. So that's more about how does regular project management deal with early stages of failure or potential failure by dealing with the different perspectives and tackling what's coming out of that information so that we want to avoid the need to go into a full recovery mode, because full recovery mode, as we've just discussed, is heavy stuff. So if we're looking at different perspectives, what are some of the reasons why we might not go into recovery mode? Some of these are going to be pretty obvious. We don't want political objectives to be a reason to hit this project with a hammer. We don't want to be saying, well, we don't like this person and we want to make their life miserable, so let's ruin their project. I mean, we've heard stories about that, and some of us may have even seen it happen. But obviously that's not a reason to do this. The fact that we don't know what we're going to get, if there's a lack of clarity in exactly what we're building here and how useful is that going to be, that doesn't by itself mean that our project is thoroughly broken. It may mean that the business case is broken. It may mean that the business case needs to be re-examined and re-envisaged. And when that happens, it may be that the project is considered to be off the rails. But then it's merely off the rails. We then still got to look at it and say, well, how far can we fix it with current methods? Is it a threat to the value justification? Simply not knowing what it's for doesn't mean we're automatically in a recovery situation. Similarly, the opportunity cost, having investment in a project and, oh, look, if we had that money, if we cancel this project, we can start this other one over here. That's not a reason to go into recovery mode and say, all right, let's just do what we can. Now, it doesn't mean it won't become a reason. If a project is successful in delivering value and is expected to continue to deliver value, if the other project has equally a good chance of delivering value, then it should justify its own investment. That doesn't always work because money isn't infinite. But normally, you might stay within normal project management methods if you need to drastically cut the scope of a project because you really want to save money and put it somewhere else. So you're taking the opportunity cost. You're saying, well, let's scale this thing right down. That's not a recovery mode. That's not a project that needs to change its leadership, shuffle everything around and contemplate its mere existence. That's a project that needs to have its scope adjusted and make some other fundamental normal changes within project management. It doesn't need recovery mode. And just because a project is deemed as a little boring doesn't mean it's broken. So these are some of the things that can be misconstrued as, well, we have this, therefore we need to get into recovery mode and seriously rejuvenate this project. Possibly not. Now, having said that, these are some reasons why we might not want to consider recovery. There are some unusual reasons outside of the strict definition that we looked at early on. We looked at, you get to stage 5, it's a pretty clear definition. If you think you're there, then and if you're not there, well, actually there's a few other things that can be a signal that we might want to investigate a little more thoroughly, because they may be a sign of a project that if it's not already a candidate for recovery, it may become one. Now, this is an example leading back to what I mentioned with the supplier perspective. When the supplier is facing profitability risks, if you have a major supplier for a project, and it could be internal or external, if they're facing major risks to the profitability of their contribution, they may do something about that. And if and when they do, that may become an existential threat to the value of the project. So when a supplier is facing profitability risks, that is a risk to the project that ideally should be handled through normal project management mechanisms. But if it's not, it may end up taking the project so far outside of tolerances that it does threaten its value. Similarly, technological advancements. Big projects take a long time. It can be that technology in other areas, in other ways, overtakes what's being developed as part of a project. And if we ignore that fact, if we just continue barreling on building something that's already out of date by the time it's built, then that may create an existential threat, because that may be a point where we say, well, hang on, if all we're going to get out of this project is this, then the value isn't worth it, the business case isn't worth it. But if that isn't recognized formally, what happens is that perhaps the project gets sabotaged, things get deprioritized, things start to run late, money starts to dry up. Other things start to become symptoms that lead the project down a path that ends up looking like it needs recovery. You can have things like...
Sorry, Brenton, I'll just interrupt that we're having a load of chat about the NBN project right now for some reason.
How topical. Let's talk about it. I'm not able to keep up with the scrolling chat.
No.
What are some of the points?
A lot of people are just talking about where technology overtaking benefits, sabotage, when you're talking about sabotaging the project or things happening like that. People just, NBN, anyone? Ooh, my thoughts too. So
it's a great example, isn't it?
Yeah. Just wondering if it's possible whether we can talk about it with reference to the NBN or any other project you're aware of.
Well, so NBN is one of those interesting ones that really tells the story of different perspectives of success, right? So the NBN, we can't ignore the fact that there's a political success factor here. There's also an economic success factor. I mean, we know that governments will invest in large-scale networks or large-scale infrastructure projects that will ultimately not yield all the benefits that were conceived of in the beginning. But there's an irrefutable benefit of the circulation of money through the economy. Now, that doesn't mean that we build something useless. For those of you who are not in Australia, NBN is the National Broadband Network. It's sort of the nationwide physical cable and copper fiber network around the country, connecting everybody to the internet. Just to make you all jealous, we have 2 of them here in Singapore, and they're already connected to everyone. So I have 2 fiber links. I have 2 fiber links to my backup fiber link is around 400 megabits. That's my backup. So anyway, my friends hate it when I talk about that sort of stuff. So, okay, so that's what it is. That's what it is. But I mean, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was working in the network industry. So I was involved with VPNs and business networking in my business. And we were dealing with microwave links. We were dealing with all sorts of alternate technologies that were beyond what the NBN was already talking about. So it was already out of date in some technologies. But you have the problem of rolling out technologies. There's always a delay between, okay, well, we're going to use this technology, and yeah, some technology may come over the top of it. So the ideal planning structure says, right, we're going to allow for the implementation of technologies. But then you have run into the cost equation. So we already have the politicized effect of the cost of the NBN. And we all knew it was going to blow out. But then you have the thing, well, if we want to have the most technologically robust solution, it's probably going to be something that's going to be harder to manage because you're managing more risks, you're managing more contingencies, you're managing more alternatives. You have more bespoke answers to particular questions. So in terms of competing interests for success and failure, you also have the fact that if you get, geopolitically, if you get a large percentage of a nation's population a better access than they would have got without it, then you're creating an uplift from an economic point of view. You're creating benefit to the community, you're creating benefit to the economy of the nation that you wouldn't have otherwise got. And could you have done it cheaper? Certainly. Could you have done it with better technologies? Certainly. And there's always going to be those that say, oh, look, this is a terrible failure because, but then there are others that are going to say, well, actually it's not, because the alternative was to sit on our hands for another 10 years and wait for technology to make it easier. And, that would create a big delay before anyone gets any kind of benefit at all. So, no, I'm not taking a stand to say, is the NBN good or bad? I'm saying that it's a good example of how broadly different the competing perspectives on success and failure might be. What other thoughts we got coming through, Guy?
Well, my thought is successfully derailed another lecture, so thank you. And jokes aside, not a fair comparison for Singapore. That's probably fair enough, given the size of it. A lot of people talking about the NBN business case with a couple of great links and some talk about cat gifts and the proliferation of them under a faster internet system. So it all sounds like you've covered all the main topics and
okay.
We're just skirting around the edges.
All right. So anyway, it is an excellent example for those that are familiar with it. So let's just finish this point and I'll pick up the pace a little bit. So if one of the main constraints becomes a threat, like if you're building a stadium for the Olympics and you're running late, that's serious. You can't delay the Olympics. You might need to get into recovery mode to drastically change things so that you absolutely are on time. Perhaps when the project manager just leaves and it's difficult to fill the gap. When risk appetite changes, really we should only be looking at existential threats to consider project recovery, but we should be looking at things that can lead to an existential threat if we want to avoid recovery or if the writing's on the wall. Now let's have a quick poll.
Okay.
Put up for me, Guy, if you could.
Yep, I'll put that up now. And also, while we're here, I was wondering if we could experiment, because a lot of people are having issues with the black box still, if you can try and share your screen differently and whether that will have an effect.
How do I do it? Share the screen differently? What am I sharing?
Share screen icon at the bottom of your Zoom box.
Yep.
And that again has come up as a black box. Have you got, what is it set to now? How are you sharing your screen? Have you got?
I'm sharing the window.
Okay, can you try your whole desktop? Is that appropriate?
It won't work because I have triple screen, so I'm 5,000 by 1,200 and something.
Okay.
Well, part of it then could be moving all the Zoom things to a different screen.
No, the issue is we're not actually seeing the poll. We're just seeing a black box.
Could it be because you're launching the poll and I'm not?
It's never been the case before.
Okay.
If you just do share, I think you can split your screens on the Zoom. Maybe just have a play with it, see what happens.
I'm just looking to see if I can share. There's no Zoom window that I can share that actually shows the poll in that window.
Well, some of the students can see the poll. I just think if for now we move all of your Zoom things to a different screen, at the very least that'll stop a lot of the black box problems.
So I've just moved it off, right? So the black box is gone, but that doesn't mean that they can see the poll.
But we've had 130 odd answer it, so I guess they can see it. Okay. Well, we'll just have a look at that and try and figure it out for next week.
Yeah, it hasn't happened before.
No. Anyway, the question is, which of the following would get the most gossip criticism in your organization? It's a multiple choice question.
We'll have to close the poll soon because we've only got 10 minutes left.
Yep.
So let's close it and share it.
Yep.
So the big result is a project that was in serious trouble but was limping along when it should not. It would be the most gossiped and criticized and talked about stuff. And in my experience, that is the most common scenario. Second place was a troubled project that was completed but then considered a failure in the end. So really the things that are most negatively talked about are going to be things where recovery should have happened. Recovery really should have happened. Like the project shouldn't have limped along and got to its end. It should have entered a different phase. So let's talk about the major roles for a moment. And I'll put them all up. You've got the project sponsor, who's the motivation for the project in the beginning. You've got the person that they're the ones who were vitalizing the project. Now, when you get into recovery mode, you need a recovery champion. And the recovery champion is the person who, once again, reinvigorates, motivates, and encourages the positive outcome. There's a lot of negativity associated with entering into recovery mode. And so the project champions, the recovery champion's job is to say, no, this will be okay. You know, we're going to get something good out of this. It won't be all bad. We'll look after the worst of what's going to happen. Yeah, it'll be painful, but we'll put some cotton wool around that and we'll do our best to get a good result in the end. And you need, as much as you had someone to believe in initially, you need someone to believe in anew. Obviously, if it's going to a salvage mode, you need someone that could well be the project manager becomes the salvage champion. So the recovery champion is the person responsible for the morale and the moral support in favor of recovering this project and enduring the pain that that involves. This is because projects are hard to kill and they're hard to radically change. The collective belief that people gain in a project or that they had from the beginning it's emotionally driven. And so is sunk cost. So you might think that, okay, sunk cost is a financial concept. You know, it's all about money that's been invested, et cetera. But, well, yes, it is. But when it comes to sunk cost affecting decision-making, it's actually more often it's emotional parameter that affects the decision-making. So sunk cost is one of the reasons why, from the recent poll, that projects limp along, because people, they don't consider the sunk cost, they react to the sunk cost. The sense of loss that would come from giving up on that time and effort. Because it's not just the money. It's what people have committed themselves to. It's what they've devoted themselves to. It's the vision that they signed on for from the project sponsor's words and vision. So we need a new vision to get people to sign on to that, to get past these emotional barriers of, well, can we handle the loss of the sunk cost? Can we handle all these other rough changes we're going to go through? Well, we need something new to believe in. So what this means is that people are going to have reasons to fight against project recovery. People are going to say, no, this doesn't suit me. I want this project to continue. You know, I want to keep my life and my job and everything stable. There's going to be reasons against it. So to help overcome those, the recovery champion is the person that does the same job that the sponsor did to get the motivation for the project in the first place. So the recovery champion is about building the new, creating the new thing. It's not about the negative. It's not about killing the old stuff. It's about what's the new exciting thing that we're going to get. It gives us something new to believe in. So then we get to a stage with the audit. Now I will go through this a little quick because the audit is something we'll go through in a little more detail in the coming weeks. But as we've been talking recently, we're talking about emotional aspects of entering into a recovery phase. And the project audit is largely about the people. You look at the reports, but you're looking at the reports to find the reasons why. So it's not about who should you get rid of. And a lot of the times I get into recovery and people say, oh, you got to fire Fred and you got to fire Mary because they're no good. Well, it's not about who do we get rid of, who do we lose, and who's no good. It's about who do we bring in? Who do we get to do more? Who do we get to do differently? So when we're exploring recovery, the question of, well, what's going on leads to the question of, well, why is that going on? Ultimately, it leads to the question of, well, who is involved with that? So it means that project recovery as a concept is going to begin with people change. It's going to begin with the idea that we're going to need structural, hierarchical leadership changes within the team, often starting with the project manager. Now, sometimes you think, well, okay, this is a complete loss of faith in the project manager. Well, actually, maybe not. There can be other reasons why the project manager is really up against it. There can be lots of things that to do with the dynamics, the politics, the history that can make a particular project quite hard for an incumbent project manager, but much easier for a new one. But yes, the audit is looking for the objective information. It's looking for the facts to work with. Who gets a voice? Everybody. We've mentioned these roles before. So when you're talking about the customer, who is the customer? And occasionally the customer and the users kind of line up a little bit. So the customer, is it the business? Is it another organization? Is it another department? Is it a team? What about the team that's building it? They're going to have a voice because they're going to have complaints. They're going to have things to talk about. They're going to have an axe to grind. And they're going to know often who is involved with what and where the weak links are. And it doesn't mean that a person is failing. It just means that their function in that situation is failing. And it could be because they're not up to it, or it could be because they're being asked to do the wrong thing. Management has a voice. The suppliers have a voice. This is the unusual one that doesn't always get taken into account. So in project management recovery, everyone needs a voice. Everyone needs to have their input taken into account before we decide exactly how we go about project recovery. Now, there's also things that can happen that are outside of what you'd strictly consider the dynamics of project management that can be serious existential problems for a project. So you can have things like major cultural differences between a supplier and a customer that can cause all sorts of uncertainties and problems and dramas that could mean that you have to drastically change how things work. Now, you might not be outside of constraints, but you might be having so much difficulty knowing how that's going to work that you need to make a radical change to what's going on. You might have policies and processes and organizational limitations that make you join the dots in a way that makes your project impossible to deliver in a certain way. And you've gone about it with some belief and some understanding, but company policy has gotten in the way. It could be that the market has changed, the industry's changed, the competitor has done something. Regulation has come in and hit us. It could be that technologies, as we talked about, technology advances and the way and the rate at which they are being innovated and adopted may mean that we have an existential threat to our project. Or it could be just that there's money problems. Maybe we had a bad quarter or a bad financial year and there's just not the same money that was there before. Or it's not as easy to get it on time. all of these can be possible reasons to say, you know what, maybe we should go about this substantially differently. And the recovery framework is a model for saying, okay, here's a way that we can go about this that is positive and is going to give us a radical change, but in a structured manner. So what does project recovery include? Well, this is something we've alluded to before. It is some substantial change of project leadership and management. It is a redefinition of the goals and objectives, or a confirmation of the goals, but it's an analysis to ask that question. It's changes to the prioritization of the objectives and the tolerances. What is more important? Is schedule more important? Is quality more important? Is budget more important? Where is the pain and what's going to change the priorities? It can be, and usually includes, major changes to the major constraints. So we look at schedule, we look at scope, time, cost, and quality as the major constraints. It's not really a triple constraint anymore. Quality is now in there. So it's going to involve major changes to these. And in particular, the scope may change. We may be taking major things off or adding things on. Last poll, our very last poll. This is going to be a lead into the homework item. Which of the following, I'll move the poll off the people said. So which of the following would be the most challenging step in recovering a project in your organization? And we'll try and only allow a minute for that poll if we can, and then quickly share it.
Yeah, we'll do that. And just for those listening to the recording, the possible answers: recognizing that the project is in that much trouble, changing the leadership of the project, revisiting all the goals and objectives of the project, major changes to the constraints, or getting all the facts straight from everyone involved. And a relatively even spread, although getting all the facts is rising to the top now.
Yeah,
got close to 75%, so I'll close it now. 40% for recognizing the project is in trouble, and close to 50% getting all the facts straight from everyone involved. And this is influenced by the fact it's a multiple choice question, of course. So
yeah, people can select more than one.
So there'll be a large number. Anyway, we'll end that one and share it.
So there you go. Getting all the facts straight. Now, that's what we're going to talk about in next week and the week after. We'll talk about how to get these facts, how to do an audit, and it's going to be dependent upon the source or the perceived source of failure. So next week we're going to talk about the sources of failures. Let's summarize this week's discussion. The major takeaways: project recovery should only be considered when a project really needs it, and that determining success and failure is not an easy thing. It requires a great deal of interpretation. You do need a recovery champion to create the positiveness that is necessary to keep the morale moving forward for a project that's in recovery mode. And getting the facts is, there's no substitute for getting all the details from everyone to get the real answers that we need. And we'll talk more about how to do that in the coming weeks. So here's your activity for the forums. This is a forum-based activity. So each week we'll have an activity, and you'll either post something or jump in and discuss constructively with someone else's post and chat. So we evolve the discussion. So it's about choosing a project that you know of or that you're aware of, and why was it, in your view, why was it considered troubled project, and how close to red did it get? And if it was to go into recovery mode, or if it did, what would be the biggest challenge for that? Or of course, as other people discuss and comment, add to that discussion. All right, I'll come back to that slide in a moment. Let me just remind everyone the 4 things you need to do for the certificate of completion. You need to complete the activities each week in the forum. You need to complete the weekly 5-question quiz, which will be posted later today for this week. There will be a final quiz, but you don't have to attend all the webinars. All right, so let me go back to that for everyone. Now that'll be posted. This will be on the forums shortly.
Yep, it's already there. Already there.
Sorry, it's already there. Okay, excellent. All right. So let me give you the last slide so that anyone who needs to go now can. What we're going to do next week, we're going to talk about the causes of project failure from the perspective of how they lead into a recovery situation and how that changes the way recovery will begin in a particular project. So we're going to look at the big ones. I mean, there's lots, but we'll look at the top few of causes of project failure. All right. Now, do we have any other...
We've got some very interesting chat that I'm going to turn into questions.
Okay.
And just a quick one for Ray. How are the forum activities assessed? Essentially, those that post in the forums will get higher marks in the course. So just a few questions, and I think the most relevant one right now is Agile and project recovery. A lot of people are wondering whether, for example, Agile is just always in recovery mode, sort of the constantly redefining itself, iterative improvements, whether it interacts slightly differently to perhaps other project management methodologies.
It does interact differently, and that's something that we will go into more detail on week 3. But the short version is that Agile most definitely can have and can benefit from a recovery mode. Is it always in recovery mode? Well, yes, that's true as well. So the Agile philosophy means that you're always able to recover. You're always able to deal with mistakes. You're always able to address. And because it exists because you're dealing with unknowns, like things you couldn't possibly have known at the beginning of the project. So you have a structure that's built for the complete guesswork that some projects require. But you can still have an Agile project that goes down a pathway where the decisions and the revelations and the things that come out of it suggest that actually the entire vision statement is incorrect, or we're not going to get anywhere near that vision statement, or a customer that says, look, I need an app that does this, and here's $100,000, and $20,000 later you think, well, we're just not going to deliver that for that much money. A major rethink of, usually in Agile, it's usually related to the vision, and it usually comes about through the Agile processes, realizing that some major aspect of the goals of the project are likely to fall short. So we'll talk about exactly how that happens, but the short answer is, yes, you can still have a recovery scenario, discussion, and impact in an Agile environment.
Beauty. Also had a couple of questions about references to a book on the Learn.IT Masters page. Is that the book that's associated with the master subject?
Yeah, that's okay. So that's optional for the short course. That is the book that we use in the full subject. And so the readings that we're providing there are the same readings that would be in the full subject. So if you have access to the book and you want to read that, that's great. If you don't, you won't need that in order to pass the quiz. So we're not going to take questions out of the book for the quiz at the end. It's an optional extra reading. Obviously, in the main course, we will. In the full subject, we will, because we provide the book. But here, we don't provide the book. But it gives you an idea of where some of these. There's actually a couple of books that I'll put up another book as well, since we're doing that, because there's 2 books that I think are worth a look.
Okay, great. We'll put that on the Moodle page. And then just a question from Soham, which I think might be a nice way to sort of conceptualize project recovery. He's asked whether NBN would be a candidate for project recovery, given its troubles and travails.
I definitely think so. And look, I think it's already been through some aspects of project recovery, and perhaps not in as structured a manner as we might think. More as symptomatic. I mean, there's been changes in the way NBN has been handled. There's been changes in some suppliers in some locations, major changes. There's been changes in contract arrangements. There's been changes in guidance, leadership, management of it over time. So a lot of the changes that you normally associate with recovery, because they're that drastic, some of those have happened to the NBN. But has it happened with a view to saying, okay, this is a seriously broken project and we're going to fix it using this? I don't think it has happened that way. So are they getting the benefit out of all these changes? Perhaps not as much as they could have, because there hasn't been the same willingness to admit that, okay, we need to change this because it's not working the way we want, or because it's not leading the results and we're not sure it will. So I think that's what's been missing from the changes that I've seen with the NBN. It's that willingness to admit where it's really at.
Okay, thanks. And maybe just a last comment from the chat. Michael's added to the agile and recovery question. He doesn't think that agile is always in recovery, since it's not the case that everything is on the table or up for review in an agile project as compared to a recovery mode. Any comment on that?
I think when I mentioned before, I did agree partially with the idea that it's always not in recovery, but it's always in review. So agile is specifically designed to have the opportunity to make changes to something, but it's not meant to be something where everything's up for grabs every sprint. It's not something where you should be just reinventing things on a regular basis. Have a structured pathway towards the vision and the goal that you're aiming for. And you're meant to have a release plan that says, all right, so this number of sprints will deliver this capability and this number of sprints will deliver this. And you leave room for the fact that you're going to learn a lot as you go, and you may change a lot of that as you go. But the difference is that's not considered broken. It may be considered challenging. It may be considered different. It might actually be fairly smooth. You might have an agile project that actually there isn't a great deal to learn, but you're simply taking advantage of the ability to react to customer feedback on an iterative basis, and that's why you're using it. So it really depends on the nature of the project. How empirical is it really? How clear is the vision? How well does the customer know what their vision should be? Because that's not always the same from agile projects. So from a methodology point of view, it's not meant to always be in recovery mode, but it has so many tools available to it that it's less likely to need the kind of recovery that a waterfall project would need. But that doesn't make it immune, especially in highly empirical projects. It doesn't make it immune to that scenario arising where too much may have been going wrong with the agile project, that you need more than simply, let's do something different this sprint.
Beauty. All right. Well, thanks for that. We might cut off comments on course content. Let people get out of here. Just a couple of things. Recording of this webinar will be available within 24 hours, and the quiz as well, the weekly quiz that is tied to the topic or module. Any questions you do have, just feel free to chuck on the forums, because we're monitoring that every day. And then JT Miller's asked Brenton, which is probably a great question, at what stage does the Podoko scenario go live for the first day?
It should go live this Friday. There will be an email sent out. So hopefully you've all received an email as part of the process when you enrolled. So that's just merely activating things. So it's just confirming what first and second name you want to have in there. That is all to begin with. We will send, if you haven't yet done that, that's okay. We'll send you a reminder when it goes live to say, hey, it's gone live, and now's the time to get in and start playing. So it should go live on Friday. There is a gameplay manual. There's some information for those who want to jump in and do it. And next week, when we talk about it, I'll do a bit of an online, for a couple of minutes, I'll just show you how it works for those who haven't had a play with it yet.
Great,
but
thanks.
That's the answer. Friday afternoon or Friday day is when it should go live.
Awesome. Really looking forward to seeing it. Alrighty. Yeah. So I just want to thank Chantel for helping out today, and thank you as well, Brenton, for another very interesting lecture, and thank everyone for attending. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Yeah, we'll catch you then. Thanks, Brenton.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Guy. Thanks, Chantel. And thanks, everyone, for the awesome questions and contribution to the discussions. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week.